Philippians 2. We're going to kind of use this as a bridge once again. Titus did Wednesday night and did Psalms, and I'm very thankful for that. He did a very good job. He always seems to, when I'm out, he gets the good Psalms, I believe, but he did a good job with that, and I appreciate that. And Psalms are in Philippians 2, beginning at verse 1. Therefore, if there's any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of spirit, if any affection and mercy, fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. A lot of lessons and a lot of things I've been studying lately since our retreat was based on this passage. Trying to keep it not only in the forefront of my mind, but hopefully others, so we can continue to be what we need to be. And if you notice these verses, as Paul starts out here, he says, first of all, therefore, if there is any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of spirit, if any affection of mercy, fulfill my joy by being like-minded. In other words, he's saying, if there's any of these things, and there should be, we should have consolation of Christ, and we should have comfort of love, fellowship of the Spirit, affection of mercy. He says, then if these things exist, then we should be doing these things. But when I really think about it, I want to ask the question, I want us to be honest with ourselves. Are we really doing a good job with this? Are we doing a good job being like-minded, having the mind of Christ, preferring that other person, understanding our working together and what that involves to do? And the more I think about it, the more I realize myself, I can do a lot better than I'm doing. And each one of us have to answer this ourselves. And that's kind of what I want us to think about tonight, is that we can do better. No matter where we think we are in our Christian life, no matter where we think we are in doing this, as far as doing what Paul is talking about here. As Paul addresses in Philippians, it's real interesting as he goes through all of these things. And as we talked about one lesson on Sunday night, how he called out two individuals. How would you like to be called out in church like that? And I've thought a lot about that. And, why was he so direct with that? Because the damage that it can do. When there's two individuals that have conflict, or there's some kind of division in the church, or something that's going on where the love is not where it should be, or the affection is not what it should be, we're not looking at each other like we should and treating each other like we should, it can be very devastating for the church as a whole. It really gets to the core of everything else that he wants us to do. And I think that's why Paul was so direct with it. And I think that's why he says here, if there is any of these things that exist, then we should be doing this. And what I want us to look at tonight is I want us to look at what can I do? I'm going to do this lesson from my own standpoint, and you can apply it to yourself. I'm not your judge. I don't know your heart, so I don't know how well you're doing in these things or how well you're not. But as we look at this, I think we all can say we can do better, but what can we do to improve? How do I improve on, when you just think about this verse within itself, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Don't look out for our own interest only, but for the interest of others. Just in that itself, what can I do to be better at that? Well, I think the first thing is I've got to look at what am I doing when it comes to that? At what level? It goes back to what Alan Webster was talking about. Where are we on that spiritual meter? I think that's a good gauge for a lot of things that we do. Where are we at to begin with? In Psalms 119 and verse 59, the psalmist says, I thought about my ways and turned my feet to your testimonies. I think the first thing we need to do is think about our ways. How many times do we just really sit down and take stock with ourselves and ask ourselves honestly, where am I at as a Christian? Where am I as far as the things in which I'm doing? Now, we could go through the list of doctrinal things. Well, I was baptized. I do this. I pray. I'm really not talking about those things. I think those things we've got. I think those things we know about. Those things we've done. Those things doctrinally we continue to do. But even when we think about that, this is a doctrinal issue. My attitude of how I do things, my attitude of someone else is a doctrinal matter because it affects how I worship, it affects how I live as a Christian. So I think the first thing I need to do is think about my ways. You know, I'm not one that likes to sit and take stock very much. I don't like quiet. I don't like to just sit and think. You know, that's why it's hard for me to read because I have to have noise. And I think the reason I have to have noise is because I don't like to think that much. And I think that's obvious by my actions a lot of times. You can tell I don't think too much. But I mean, if it's quiet, I can't sleep. I tell you, I had the hardest time sleeping ever. I can still remember every single night I spent in India. And it wasn't because it was hotter than any place I've ever been. It wasn't because there was bugs everywhere. It wasn't because there was stuff crawling out of the ceiling. And, you know, and I was trying to shove things up in a hole up there and trying to keep things. It wasn't because all that. It's just because it was quiet. I didn't have my fan with me. You know, I've slept with a fan since I don't ever remember not sleeping with a fan. So I had it, and that is the first time I remember that I'd never slept with one. And it was just quiet. And then I had to think, you know, while I was just sitting there and, you know, and thinking. And that's just not an easy thing to do sometimes. When you get alone with your own thoughts, then you have to start looking at yourself, don't you? You have to start thinking about your ways, thinking about why you're doing the things that you're doing. And a lot of us don't like to think that. We like the out of sight, out of mind. We don't like to take really good stock. But look at Luke 15 and verse 17. Remember the prodigal son? But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and spare, and I perish with hunger? And we know the story of the prodigal son. We know all the trouble that he got into. We know why he ended up where he was. But what's the reason he went back? He started to think. Until he came to himself, he was going to keep doing what he did. Until he actually realized, you know, I'm out here in the mud with a bunch of pigs. He never knew it until then. Never paid any attention to it till then. Never realized how far he had gotten until he just really realized and came to himself. He started thinking. He started thinking about his ways. He started thinking about what got me to this point. Well, maybe we need to start thinking about it before we get in the pig pen, don't we? Maybe we need to start thinking a little bit more before we get that far. Start thinking of our decisions, thinking about what the decisions that we make, think about the words that we say. And here's the reason I say this is because until we start thinking about our ways, then I can't resolve a conflict with someone unless I really think and realize what part do I play in this? Or I can't be a part of some program that's going on at church, something that's going on, whether it's successful or not. I need to ask myself, what part am I doing in this? When it comes to worship, what are my feelings toward worship, and what part of my participation am I doing? You know, am I singing as I should? Am I praying as I should? Am I listening as I should? Am I really doing these things like I should be doing them? What part do I play? And I think that's something we need to think about before we ever walk in this building, shouldn't we? We need to think about, why am I going? Why am I here? Not just why am I here, even for that, why am I going? What's the purpose of me going? It's Wednesday night and it's just what you do. It's you know, I have to because I teach class. You know, I said one time after I was at a congregation and we were talking about, we just got through a VBS, and I was talking about, the attendance during VBS for that particular congregation was down. And we were discussing that, kind of openly one night, Wednesday night. And I just made the comment, I said, what would you think if I wasn't here? if I decided I wasn't going to come to VBS, and somebody raised their hand, they said, well, you have to. It's in your contract. You're the preacher. And I thought, I come to VBS because it's in my contract. One, I've never signed a contract, preaching in my life. But the other, I thought, so that's what you think. Is that what I think? Do I think I go to VBS because I'm the preacher and have to? I think that was an honest question to ask myself, why do I do the things in which I do? I think about that a lot when I'm studying for a lesson. I think, why am I actually studying? Is it just for this lesson, or am I studying because I need to study as a child of God? I think there's a lot of things that each of us can ask ourselves questions and really determine where we're at. Notice what Paul said in 2 Corinthians 13. He said, examine yourself as to whether you are in the faith. Test yourself. Do you not know yourself that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you are disqualified? Well, go back to Philippians. We're thinking about, do we have that mind of Christ? Are we one mind? Is Christ in me? Is that what I'm thinking about? Is that my purpose, to let Christ be seen in me? Or is my purpose for me to be seen? I think that goes a long way to think about a lot of, not just problems, but successes in congregations, is each of us have to first and foremost, before we could do better, is to figure out where we're at to begin with, and to be honest with that. And sometimes that's not and it's not, let me ask you this, would it be a bad thing, and that may be why we don't want to do it, would it be a bad thing for me to think about a certain thing and realize that I'm not doing enough? You think that's a bad thing? It depends on what you do with it. I think recognizing it and doing something about it could be a good thing. Titus, did you?
The hardest thing, and I think it looks different for people at different ages. At my age, I think it was survival. For other people, I think maybe go through the motions. But the hardest thing is to switch from just going through your day and kind of letting the day happen to you, and switching to being intentional about everything you do, but especially your spirituality. Because it's just the easiest thing in the world to just kind of get through. Man, I just barely survived this day. Well, is that what we should be aiming for? Should we be shooting for more than just survival? But like you're saying, thinking about, what am I doing?
Yeah. I think that's a good point, because I think we live our lives like that a lot. We live our lives sometimes, if I can just get to this day or this point. It used to be a weekend. I don't even know what a weekend is anymore. But, it used to be if I could just get here. I know we live our lives by, especially the last few weeks, if we could just get through VBS. If we could just get through VBS, then past VBS, if we could just get to this next point. And I think sometimes even in our lives is, I do this at work, we do this out in our lives, but I think it does transpire into our Christian life and the things we do at church if we could just get to this. And I think sometimes we're just getting to Wednesday and getting to Sunday and not thinking about a whole lot of why we're coming, why we're doing these things, and what we do in between. I think as Titus says, sometimes we are just surviving. And I think it depends on where you're at in your life. A lot of people have a lot of different things that they have to go through, and have to face. But I think that's a good observation, is that sometimes we're just surviving through it. And I don't think our Christian life is meant just to survive through it. Jesus said, I came to give you life and give it to you more abundantly. We should have an abundant life. We should have a good life, even with struggles that we go through and the things that we face. But, examining ourselves, I think, is an essential part of it, and it should be the beginning part of it. If we don't examine ourselves, if we don't look at our ways, then how are we going to improve? How are we going to evaluate what I can do better or what I'm doing good? I mean, even if we're doing good, we can always do better. We can always do something to say, okay, I'm going to challenge myself to do this. I'm going to, sometimes I may talk this way to somebody or do something when it comes to somebody else. I'm going to challenge myself to do different in this. I'm going to have the conversation be different and see if that turns out different. I'm going do something a different way. As they say, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting something different. And I think sometimes we kind of do that. I do things sometimes. I work on something, and if it don't work out, I keep doing that same thing thinking it's going to turn out differently. I'm thinking, well, okay, I've got to do something different here. This isn't working. I've already spent 2 hours on this, and it's not working, but we keep doing the same thing. And I think sometimes we do that in our Christian life. We kind of keep doing those same things. But we should want to do better. We should want to be better. And I think we have to examine ourselves to be able to do that. Any other thoughts? I'm sorry, honey, you're going to speak up. I'm older. My head stopped up, and I didn't hear a word you said.
I said the reading something over and over is basically like building a puzzle or solving something.
Mm-hmm.
If you keep making the same mistake, you're going to get the same answer. Nothing's going to be different.
Yeah, and nothing's going to be different. It's and sometimes we have to realize that, working together, like solving something and putting puzzle, it takes us working together. And sometimes we have to be willing to say, the way I'm doing it's not working, and that's hard to admit. It's hard. I've always been of the frame of mind of I've never liked things undone. I like things just. That's why sometimes going over here in this other building, it just drives me insane to walk in the door until it's done, and in the process as we're doing it. And I'm like that at home. When you're in the middle of something and you've got piles of stuff here, it just drives me insane. I can't function until things get back right. But you have to do that to make them right, don't you? Sometimes you have to kind of clutter things up. Sometimes you have to change things around. And I think for myself personally, that's what I'm scared to do, sometimes even in my life, is to kind of change it around. Because I like to just see it done and move on. I just want to, kind of fix it or ignore it. That's kind of my policy. If I can't fix it, I try to ignore it. And sometimes we just can't do that. Sometimes we may just have to say, I'm struggling here. What I'm doing is not working. I need somebody to help me to get through this. And I think that would go a long way, I think, in our Christianity if we do that. But in examining ourselves, I think we have to make sure that we know what we're examining ourselves to. In 2 Corinthians 10, in verse 12, "For we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves, but they measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves are not wise." Now here's where we can kind of get in trouble. If I start taking stock in myself and I start trying to look at where I'm at, sometimes we tend to say, okay, where am I at compared to this person here? Or where am I at compared to this person here? And it may give us a false sense of really where we're at. Because I may look at this person and think they're in a totally different place than they really are. Somebody may look at me and say, boy, he's really got his life together. Boy, I wish I could live just like him. I'm sure there's people think that all the time about me. But believe me, they wouldn't want to live in this head. I can tell you. I tell my wife all the time, it's scary up in here. You wouldn't want to do that. That was a joke. Nobody even laughed at that or nothing. So y'all really think people look at my life and think, boy, I want to live like that. But I think we can misjudge things. We can misjudge our own work by determining where we think somebody else is by just looking at their fruits. But they may be struggling with the same things. So we got to make sure we're not comparing ourselves with ourselves when we're taking note, because we still may not be any better off than we were, because we can get a false sense of that. We may think we're worse off, or we may think we're better, depending on what we're comparing ourselves to. And Proverbs 16:25 says, "There's a way that seemeth right to a man, but the end, therefore, the ways of death." So see, I may start comparing myself with others, or I may look at myself and say, okay, here's what I think I need to do. And I may take myself down a path that's worse than I was to begin with. So when we start taking stock, we need to make sure where we're taking stock and what standard we're using. Notice, Psalms 119, back to the first verse we used. "I thought about my ways," notice, "and I turned my feet to your testimonies. I made haste and did not delay to keep your commandments." So he said, I thought about my ways, and he did what? He said, I turned to your testimonies, and I didn't make haste following your commandments. In other words, I thought about where I'm at, and I measured myself based on what your word is, your testimony is, and I didn't waste any time following what you said to do. And that's where we've got to be careful. When we start looking at ourselves and we start thinking about ourselves, we've got to make sure we say, okay, here I am based on what God's word says. And where am I at compared to that? Because nothing else matters, does it? I can come up with a lot of other ideas, and I can come up with a lot of other things, and I can think I'm doing the best in the world, and I'm actually doing worse because I'm not following what God says. So I have to make sure that I'm looking at His Word, I'm taking stock in His Word when I'm examining where am I at based on what He says to do. And when I look at verses like Philippians 2, 1 through 4, or even down farther, sometimes I think, well, I skip over those things. Now, I can take you to baptism. I can take you to where you can sing and make melody in your heart, so that tells you not to use instruments. I can take you to all these things, but we want to skip over things like this. You know, we don't want to think about attitude. We don't want to think about how we treat people. We don't want to think about, we just want to be able to give those doctrinal answers.
And being young men, the issues that deal with sound doctrine are all the issues that we're right on.
Yeah.
The things I'm good at, that's what matters for sound doctrine.
Yeah.
Everything else, that's just extra stuff.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Is this doctrine? I mean, what do we determine when we say something's doctrine? You know, this is as much doctrine as anything else is. It's teaching. Yeah, that's what it is. He's saying this is, and Paul here is getting to the root of things. He's saying if you don't have this, then that's why you've got these other problems here. You know, it comes back to how you view not only God's Word in your life, but how you use that in relationship to how you live your life and how you treat other people. And Paul understood how important that is. Look how many times in his epistles that he dealt with matters like this. And he kept saying, if you just go back to this, if you would just look at this and follow this, then this is going to take care. Isn't that the same thing Jesus always said? You know, you've heard it said this, but I'm saying, go back to your heart. Look at your heart. Look how you've twisted this. And realize that's where it begins. So a man thinketh in his heart, so he is. And he says those are the things that you need to think about. In Psalms, we already did verse 60. Now notice, when we look at, start examining ourselves, and we start realizing what we need to judge ourselves with, which is God's Word, when we look at the right source, and notice he said, I make haste to do it. Why is it so important to make haste to do it? You know, I look at your testimonies, and I didn't waste any time following your commands. How long you got to live? You got, what'd you say? Yeah. And I think that's what we got to do when we start looking at ourselves, when we start examining ourselves. We've got to realize the urgency that's there. I think that should be one of the first things that we notice is the urgency of it, because judgment depends upon it. 2 Corinthians 5 and 10, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive the things done in the body according to what he's done, whether good or bad. This tells me, you know, judgment is going to be a big cooperative thing, but I'm going to be judged personally. So this is going to affect me. So I can't do anything to, you know, fix somebody else until I make sure that I'm doing what I should. Because I'm going to give an account of the things I do in the body, whether good or bad. So it's not only look at the bad things that I'm not doing. What about the good things that I'm not doing? I'm going to be judged by those things. What about the opportunities that I had? What about how I treated people? What about the things in which that I had the opportunity to do, and maybe because of my attitude or because of where I thought I was in my Christian life, I didn't do it. You know, maybe I turned it down. In Galatians chapter 6 and verse 8, for he who sows to the flesh will of the flesh reap corruption, but he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap life everlasting. So the things that I'm doing, good or bad, That's what I'm going to be judged on. And I've got to think about that. So I've got to make haste in following His commands. Okay, where am I at in my faith? You know, well, I became a Christian. I go to worship. I'm there every time the door's open. I've got these things down, but my faith isn't just that. My faith is my attitude toward the things that I'm doing. My faith is the attitude toward those that I'm doing this with. But when I stand before God, I'm going to give an account for these things. And I've got to make sure that I realize it. One of my favorite passages in Scripture is Matthew 25. When it comes to the judgment scene, notice what he says. When the Son of Man comes in His glory, and all the holy angels with Him, then He will sit on the throne of His glory. All the nations will be gathered before Him. He will separate them one from another. A shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And He will set the sheep on His right hand, but the goats on His left. Then the King will say to those on His right hand, Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer Him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the King will answer and say to them, Assuredly I say to you, insomuch as you did it to one of the least of these brethren, you did it to me. Then He will also say to those on the left hand, Depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, you did not visit me. Then they also will answer Him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister to you? Then He will answer and say, Surely I say to you, insomuch as you did not do it to the one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away in everlasting punishment, but the righteous into everlasting life. Why do you think this is in Scripture for us? What do you think this scene is? I mean, could He have not showed a judgment scene of, like Matthew chapter 7, Lord, we've done all these things in your name. And He said, Depart from me, I never knew you, because you didn't do it in my name. Why didn't He do another and say, well, you became a Christian, you were baptized like you were supposed to. I noticed you was there every time. Why wasn't there a scene like that? What do you think the significance of this is? Giving somebody a cold drink of water, clothing them, visiting them, feeding them. Mm-hmm.
That needed something. It wasn't anything major. You didn't have to go into debt to do it. You didn't have to change anything. You just gave what you had. And we need to do that.
Yeah.
It's not about the big thing. It's about the simple.
Yeah. It doesn't take a lot to do it. And it's opportunities that someone took to do that. They didn't say, well, I'm too busy. I've got to do this big thing. I can't help you change that tire because I've got to get to service and I can't be there. I've got to be there 10 minutes till, or Rellin will fuss at me when I get there. So I can't help you do this tire. I can't. I can remember. I think it may have been. It was my first place I preached at, and it may have been my first Sunday morning lesson. I was late for that very thing. And I was devastated. I was just, I got to, and it just, I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I've got time to do this. What are they going to say? What are they going, And then I actually thought about this verse, and I thought, well, what's he going to say, if I have an opportunity to help and I don't help? I think it's these little things, these little everyday things that we have an opportunity to do that should be on the forefront of our mind to do. If we're practicing Philippians 2, especially those passages, then that's just going to be something that we do, isn't it? That's something that we're going to think about. We're going to notice someone. We're not going to be so consumed with ourselves or consumed with busy work that we're not going to notice someone when they need that. And I think that's a very powerful passage for us to always think about when we're thinking about how should I live my life. I think how I should live my life and my Christian life is not forget about these little opportunities that we have.
Sometimes the things that happen to Christians, they do things because it's a matter of nature, their nature to do that. And we get that kind of nature from the Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually do what the Scripture says.
Yeah. I think sometimes we give it a bad term of getting into a rut. I think sometimes there's nothing wrong with being in a rut and being in a routine of, I'm in the routine of taking the Lord's Supper every Sunday. I'm in the routine of praying. I should be in the routine of helping someone when they have need. Does somebody have something?
The basics of Christian life can be seen here. It's a life of servitude. So everything that we do should be in service.
Yeah. You think of all the things that Jesus could have said and did with his disciples at the end. What did he do? He washed their feet. Of all the things that he could, that's the big moment. He's had all of this teaching, and now it's all going to be, it's coming there. His death is imminent now. It's coming. All this is about to happen. And in this big moment, what does he do? He washes their feet. Do you think that's what he wanted on their minds so they would do the things that he's been teaching them to do for the right reasons? That life of servitude it's about how can I help you? How can I help how can I help Mike get to heaven? Well, it may be helping him something physically. It may be helping him something spiritually. I know it's got to be helping him something mentally. But who knows? Whatever it is, we should do that, shouldn't we? What can I do to help make your life that abundant life that Jesus said he came to give us? And how does he give it to us? We're the hands of it, aren't we? We're his words here, but we're the hands to do that. We're what shows that. These things that he says, we're the walking testimony of it. And we show those things. What are we not showing of him? Do you ever think he says, boy, I missed an opportunity there. That was a good, thing there for somebody to know me, and Ronald didn't do it. That was a good opportunity to give that helping hand, and he didn't do it. Why didn't I do it? I was thinking about something else. I was caught in my own world. I was, as Ty said, trying to survive the day, just trying to get through VBS. Just trying to get to VBS, just trying to get to the next meeting, trying to get to the next Sunday, trying to get through the next funeral at work, whatever it is, just if I could just get to that, But then after that, there's going to be something else, isn't there? Something else is coming. So how do we all get the same amount of hours in the day. How do we spend it? I heard someone say the other day, they asked me how old I was. And they've come through the door at the funeral home. He was an older man. I said, well, I'm 53. And he said, well, life is going by at 53 miles an hour for you. He said, it's going by at 85 miles an hour for me. And, he kind of took me back, and I just kind of laughed as he went on through. But more I thought about that, and I thought, boy, I guess that's right. That's about how fast your life goes, about whatever age you are, isn't it? That's how fast your life is kind of speeding by. And what are we doing with it? When it comes to our Christian life. I think these things will go a whole lot. And Hebrews 10:25, that's personal things. Hebrews 10:24 and 25. And let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some, but exhorting one another, so much as the more as you see the day approaching. Here's something collectively we can do in this encouragement and knowing that it's coming. And here's the thing, no matter who we are within congregation, within our life, it doesn't matter if you're an elder, it doesn't matter if you're a deacon, a preacher, a teacher, song leader, leading prayer, waiting on the Lord's Supper, counting. It doesn't matter what we do within this. We all can look at it and say, one, for ourselves, what can I do to make my role in here better? What can I do better at my role? Whatever my role is, what can I do to improve it so the whole function can work better? And then I need to stand back and say, okay, what can I do to help this person's role to be better? What can I do to help build them up? What can I help to encourage them to do better than what they're doing? They may be struggling that. How can I help? You know, there's just a lot of things I think, and it starts with, you know, I've thought about all the lessons that I've been doing when it comes to Philippians 2, and I thought, you know, it really just comes down to, as Paul says, I've got to first stop and look at my ways, examine myself, and see where I'm at, and see what I can do to do better. And I think we all can do better. We all need to challenge ourselves. What can I do? You know, we even say in our prayers, help us to do the things to make us a better Christian tomorrow than I am today. What actually makes us a better Christian? I'm either a Christian or I'm not. What makes me a better Christian? What can make Mike a better Christian than me? Or Titus? Is there something that makes someone a better Christian? Or does it just make someone a faithful Christian? You know, what can I do to be a faithful Christian? What can I do to be faithful in what I'm doing? To do it better than I'm doing. You know, He's the one that makes me holy. He's the one that makes me perfect. He's the one that makes me righteous. I just have to do what He says to do. It's not me that makes me better. It's not me that makes me righteous. It's not me that makes me holy. It's following what He says to do. As the psalmist said, you know, I considered my ways. I went to your testimony. I made haste to follow your commands. And I think that's what we need to do, isn't it? Any final thoughts about this?